Okay, if we want to, Melanie, if you want to go ahead and get started, maybe do a quick intro and then we can jump into it.
Yeah, perfect. I'll just get started. There's going to be an introduction in my presentation. But I'm curious, since it's a small group and we'll record this for others. Um, who do we have on here? So we have Austin, and then who is the Millers? Just because I feel like this can be more of a personal session, given it's a small group.
Sure. So my name is David Miller. My wife, Noelle, is in DSP and noticed this opportunity and kind of signed me up for it. So thought it would be good.
Awesome. And David, are you where are you at in the job scope? So like just so I can tailor this a little bit depending on where you both are at. What's the latest for you?
Sure. So I'm looking for a mid to senior environmental engineer or GIS position at the moment, GIS analyst at the moment.
Cool. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. And then Austin, oh good, yeah, I gotta see you on camera. And Austin, what about you?
Cool headphones.
Nice.
Yeah, I like your headphones. Those are nice. Yeah, so let me see. I am very actively searching for a job. I actually just started my company 6 months ago and I've realized that it's very underwater. And let me see, I just finished my MBA. So I'm trying to transition into like a strategic or management consultant position, would be ideally what I'm really looking for. So
Got it. Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad I had you guys tell me this because, if I was speaking with college students versus people kind of a little further in their career, I can kind of tailor that story a little bit. It'll still be applicable and a little bit more general for everybody, but great to know. So I'm going to hop in. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pull up a presentation. It's going to be about 35-ish minutes, but I'm going to go really quick through it. It's going to give you guys the full scope. Right when we're done, I will answer any questions that you might have, and we can just have like a quick conversation after and like just talk about anything that comes up. But I'm going to go through a couple of things that maybe you haven't thought about as you're looking for a job and trying to figure this whole thing out. So let me hop in. All right, you guys can all see this? Great. Okay. Here, perfect. All right, so let me just introduce myself. So I'm Melanie. I'm super excited to be here today. I've actually been working with DSP for a bit now. So I've been to 2 LEAD conferences and have been talking with Luke and, just, working my way in and hopefully getting some resources on the table. For my background, I really, really struggled to land a job out of college. So that's actually where my inspiration to help people land jobs came from. It just wasn't working for me. I felt like I wasn't getting traction, applying to a black hole, really. And I had told myself, Mel, when you finally figure this out, you're writing a book. So eventually I landed a job in New York City at a company called Undertone in advertising. And shortly after I published a book, Bold, Get Noticed, Get Hired. I actually have it right here. And this was really, I had used some techniques and a lot of that I'll kind of share tonight, but I had said, why aren't more people doing this? Once I figured it out, I was like, people need to understand this and people need to understand it in college. So I set out to figure out what did successful people do to get their first break and foot in the door. And that's really what that book was about. It was an interview series. But my journey carried on. So I worked at Twitter, CrossInstall. The company CrossInstall was then acquired back by Twitter. And then I find myself at Apple today. So I work in sports and entertainment at Apple. And through that whole process, so for the last 13 years after launching my book or publishing the book, I naturally and really organically started coaching and speaking and talking to people and helping people navigate their careers. So my book became a part of a couple curriculums. College students were reaching out to me. And I found myself behind the curtain, so at these companies, seeing how hiring was working and how, managers were deciding on who they chose. And then on the other side, I'm talking to a lot of college students and recent college grads and young professionals, and I'm helping them navigate their careers. And what I found was this pretty big miss in between. So what most people figured was how to get your foot in the door was not how people were hiring. And I wanted to really teach people what was going on behind the curtain. So I started my company, Going Places. And with Going Places, after a couple years of career coaching, I launched a course called Get Hired. And Get Hired was really, I could only work with 10 people at a time at most, and I wanted to get these resources out to everybody. So it's the start to finish program to landing a job, and really all in one place. So in my Get Hired course, it really covers 4 main parts. Foundation and discovery. It's important before you're even thinking about what you want to do, what type of job you're going to go after. You have to think about what you're interested in, setting the baseline, making sure your brand is out there in the way that you want it to be, your LinkedIn, your resume, all of those things, and really saying, what gives me energy? And for both of you, more than just entry level, right? You're into your career. Sometimes it's easy to get caught in the wind and think, this is what I've been doing for so long, and this is my natural path. And we forget to go back and say, what gives me energy? What do I enjoy? Whether you're in the middle of working at a company and then you're trying to get a job, kind of going back to the basics. What do I want to be doing? And not necessarily what company I want to work at, but what makes me happy from a day-to-day, the certain tasks, what I'm doing. We forget to do that, and that's important. And then it's all about organization and strategy. You really can't look for a job without being organized and having a strategy around it, right? It's like you can't just fly your resume through a black hole and just apply for every single job that comes at you. It's you're gonna find yourself lost in that process. So before you even think about where you're going or you're applying to, you have to do those 2 parts first. And then it's about networking, and then it's the close. So in my Get Hired course, everything I teach from start to finish will never involve applying for a job online. So I'm going to go back here for a second. All of these companies, I've never applied online. Everything has been through a referral. They've barely seen my resume. They haven't asked me what college I went to. And that's because that's how hiring works. It's all an internal referral. You have to know someone. And the beauty is what I'm going to teach you tonight. We're going to focus on the networking component. You don't have to know a single person at a company to get that referral. Everything I'm going to teach you is how to do it from scratch. You might be, I was in Hawaii and I needed a referral in New York City, or I was in New York and I needed a referral in San Francisco. I didn't have a built-in network there. I didn't know people at the companies I wanted to work at. So I did all the things I'm going to teach you tonight, and so have hundreds of people that I've worked with. Okay, so what are we going to talk about tonight? I'm first going to just do a quick pullback of the curtain, how hiring actually works. Then we're going to talk a little bit about rejection. If you're kind of well into the job search and you've been going at it for a bit, or you're trying to figure it out, it does come with a lot of rejection. You have to be tough to get past it. Then we're going to talk about networking. I'm going to go through 8 steps that are really actionable. And then I'm going to end with my own story, a quick tidbit of how I landed my first, or how I really broke in and got my start. Okay, so, before I get into how hiring works, it's important to really think about how society portrays hiring. And what you're taught in high school, in college, probably in your MBA, anything, is do all the things, right? Get the degrees, work hard, get an internship, get your resume in order, make your LinkedIn look good, and then apply online. Find open jobs that fit you and apply. We see commercials. I've seen so many from Indeed. You see it on LinkedIn. You see all these things happening. But what we don't realize is that's not how hiring works on the other side. And that's because of the mechanics. So first of all, hiring is difficult. Let's walk through it. A position's open, right? Okay, so the hiring manager needs to hire. And what happens is, because hiring is difficult, a hiring manager may have one open role. It's really hard to sort through these pieces of paper that they've never met before, people that are hiring on, like, applying online, and say, I hope this is a good candidate, right? For your one open role, I hope they're qualified. So they just don't do it. It's just too difficult. So what they do is they go to their team, they go to their department, sometimes the whole company, and they say, hey, everyone, do you have a candidate that would be a good fit? Here's a job description of what I'm hiring. And I'm curious, for you both on this call, have you ever experienced this? Has this, at any company you've ever worked at, have you ever gotten this email before? No. Okay. So, it's one of these things that we don't always know it's happening, but naturally, you want to feel like you are hiring someone trusted. So you ask your people that you trust to send you good candidates. So what happens is, in a lot of situations, these employers at a company are getting these emails. I've gotten this email thousands of times throughout my career. And I get the email and I stop what I'm doing. Even if I'm busy, I take a look at it. I'm like, do I know someone? And the reason I do this, so the reason I do this is because at a lot of companies, because hiring is so difficult, they give you a bonus if you submit someone. So if I get that email and the hiring manager says, hey, do you know anyone? And I think, and I'm like, you know what, Carrie, he'd be a good referral. He's looking for a job. And I send the hiring manager that resume and Carrie gets hired, I could make anywhere from $500 to $20,000. And I know that sounds crazy, but I have seen $20,000 before. Same reason why they hire recruiting companies, right? Hiring is tough. It's really, really hard. And even if you don't have a referral, people still want referrals. I just spoke at a conference this last week, and it was a bunch of teachers. And I said, hey, there was about 100 teachers in the room. And I said, raise your hand if you knew someone at your school before you got the job who helped you get your resume in the door. 90% of the people raised their hand. It's wild. So this happens, it's happening all the time. So that manager who asks people to send them referrals gets a stack of resumes on their desk. And then they start interviewing, right? They're like, okay, why wait? I'm going to start interviewing. I have people who are qualified, who I trust my colleagues. They're sending people to me. And then this is where the problem occurs. And this is where the miss happens. And that is sometimes a week later, sometimes 2 weeks later, sometimes a month later, HR posts that job online. So of you two on this call, Austin, and remind me your first name again.
David is my first name.
David. So Austin and David, how many of you in the last 3 months have applied to a job online?
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah,
Okay.
kind of.
Exactly. So the issue that occurs is that when you apply online, you're behind for 2 reasons. And the first one is that, one, you have to break through the noise. There have been so many layoffs happening with everything going on in our economy. I was told the other day at Apple that every single open role we have has over 1,000 candidates applying. So you have to have that chance. It's probably less than a 1% chance that your resume gets seen by the HR and makes it to the desk of the hiring manager because of how many resumes are being submitted for every role. So let's just say your odds are really low, right? But you know what? It happens sometimes. And the more qualified, the more experience you have, the better a chance, the less candidates that are applying for these roles, right? So maybe there's a chance that you get through. But what people don't realize is you're still behind. And the reason being is because those internal referrals that are being submitted are farther along in the interview process, and they're a trusted candidate. So you think you have a shot, right? And you're applying online and you're going through it and you get an interview and then you don't make it to the next round. You're like, oh, I'm not good enough for this. The reality is you never had a shot to begin with, because people with the trusted stamp of approval are farther along. They're probably on their final round. You just got your first interview. The job was just posted. Most jobs posted online have been there. They're already hiring at that point. They're already going through the interview process. So if it's not clear, in order to have a fighting chance at any job, you have to have a referral. You really do. You have to speak to a human being. You have to have someone hand submit your resume to the hiring manager. I'm going to teach you how to do that. So before we get into it, I'm going to talk a little bit about rejection. I want you both to think for a second. And you don't need to say it out loud unless you want to. But think, and Luke, you too, think about the last thing you did not go for because you just didn't want to fail. Could be anything, very small, very big. Just think about it for a second. I'm going to think too. Does anyone want to share? No worries with that. Okay. Maybe someone watching the recording will want to, say this out loud. Sometimes just recognizing it, because guess what? If you don't go for something, you never had a shot, right? So your chances of failing are the exact same as the worst case scenario if you went for it. So just get ready to get rejected, because in this sort of work, so when you're applying for jobs, when you're trying to get your foot in the door, honestly, in life, it's just a series of rejections. And you really have to think to yourself. And this could be for anything, right? And this happens starting in like 5th grade and it goes to the day you die, but you have to think, what's the worst thing that can happen? Every time you come up against a scenario, whether it's applying for a job, whether it's asking someone on a date, whether it's, trying out a new sport, doing something, you always have to think, what's the worst that can happen? And if the worst thing that can happen is someone says no, or you don't get it, then bring it on. Because rejection is just redirection. I mentioned I had a really tough time, landing a job out of college, and I had put all my eggs in my basket, and it was like I had one job I wanted. I went to the final round. I was living in Pittsburgh at the time, and I didn't get this job. And then I graduated, and I was so shattered because I had pictured my life in Pittsburgh, and I was so excited. And I didn't have a job, and I had to move home, and I'm from Hawaii. So it was a very big change. And I sat on my couch and I just thought, oh my gosh, I was, just devastated. And then I think back and I'm like, oh my gosh, if I would have gotten that job, I wouldn't be speaking to you. I wouldn't have wrote a book. I wouldn't be working at Apple. I wouldn't have a program. Like, all of these things would never have happened if I would have gotten that job. And I'm like, thank God I didn't get that job. And this goes for so many things, right? Rejection is redirection. Yeah, you're not going to get most things that you go for, but just redirect. And it's so easy to look back. We all can look back. Oh, thank God, this, that. But do your best in the moment to say, you know what? Rejection is redirection, one foot in front of the next. Keep moving forward. Keep putting your name in the hat. Because when it comes to finding a job, you have to knock on so many doors. And if you give up before that one open door, you're never going to get that open door. We need to give ourselves enough shots, put our name in that enough times where finally, miraculously, that door opens. Everyone's like, oh, you're so lucky, blah, blah, blah. No, it's not luck. You're putting your name in the hat so many times that you increase your chances. People forget that, right? When we think someone's successful, they've done all these things, ask them how many times they've been rejected. I bet you it's a crazy amount of times, or a way bigger story. And I think finding a job and dating are like the exact same thing, but you can ask 100 people out on a date. If you get 99 no's, you have a date. No one asks you about the 99 no's, right? You're going out. So find your yes. And that's so important when you're looking for a job, because it's so easy. It's like running a marathon. It's exhausting, right? You go through moments of a full month of just rejection. You just feel like, oh my God, it's never going to work. Pace yourself. One foot in front of the next. Know that that's supposed to happen. All you need is one yes. So I want you to think back, right? We thought in the beginning, what did we not do? But then think about what you will do. I'm a big believer in manifestation in the sense if you put it out there and you ask the universe for something and you say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, those things happen. Hold yourself accountable for what you're going to try, because even if you fail, okay, we're in the same place if we didn't do it, right? That's the worst case. Maybe one of these times we don't fail. So it's important to acknowledge and be aware. You might realize that most things in your life you never had a shot for because you're just not trying. All right, end of that speech. We're all pumped up, right? We're ready to start networking, because networking is really a lot of rejection as well. All right, so by the end of this session, you will know how to reach out to professionals with knowledge, confidence, and tact, which is the core to landing a job. And it's really a formula that I've developed. Genuine flattery plus adding value equals connection. Most people have tried networking, maybe you're good at networking, but there's a real formula. And when I audit people's networking, I can usually see why they're not getting the responses they want. And when we network, we're not networking to hide behind your screen, right? I mean, I'm talking your cell phone or your email. In order to develop relationships, we need to be on camera. We need to be in person. We need to be having as much face-to-face time as possible. That's why in sales, I mean, I've been in sales for 13 years. There was one point when I was living in San Francisco that I wanted to close a deal with a gaming company because I worked in advertising. And I flew to London for a 1-hour meeting, because there's a power to face-to-face interaction, to human interaction. You close deals that way. And that's the same thing with networking. All right, so we're gonna cover 3 areas. I'm gonna go quick. We're gonna, be skimming some things, but we're gonna get it all in. So number 1, we need to find our people. 2, communicate strategically. And 3, we need to know what we want. All right, so let's talk about finding your people. Essentially, you could be the best networker, but if no one's seeing your message, you're not really networking, right? And this is the first big problem. You could be taking hours to craft these heartfelt emails and LinkedIn messages, but are people you're sending them to looking at that? You have to be seen. So we need to think about, where will we be seen? Everyone is somewhere. So we need to find out where that somewhere is. And the fun thing is, it could be multiple places for the same company. So let's say you're like, all right, I want to work at Spotify. I need to get in touch with someone at Spotify to get on a call, to network. Where am I going to find them? Well, maybe you find that there's someone at Spotify active on Twitter. Maybe you see someone on TikTok. Maybe a couple people are on LinkedIn. You can see their activity is high, they're posting. Maybe you find an email, you're like, I'm going to try an email from someone. Go after all of them, right? You don't need to stick to one channel. And just because it's a social network doesn't mean you can't use that as a networking tool. It's important that you are professional and that your social network reflects the professionalism you want. So if your Instagram is something that you probably don't want an employer seeing, don't use that, or clean it up, right? But this is a great, all these channels can be places to network. And the fun thing is, I've done this so many times where I send John a LinkedIn message, haven't heard back, but I go and research his name and I see, you know what? John's active on Twitter. So I tweet at John. I'm like, hey, John, sent you a LinkedIn message, would love to chat. 20 minutes later, I have a response on LinkedIn, because he wasn't looking on LinkedIn, but he's on Twitter and he saw me on Twitter. He saw the message. So we just need to be seen. So you can do that all the time. And it's not annoying. It's more so saying, hey, check your messages. I just sent you something. People are busy. Sometimes it just gets buried under a pile of emails. It's funny, whenever I speak to college students, I get a lot of emails after, or a lot of LinkedIn messages. There was one point I spoke to a group of 1,000 students and I had like 450 messages. And there was no way I could go through that I got to everyone, but it took me about a month. And I had 2 people DM my You Go Places Instagram. And instantly, I was so excited I got back to them instantly, because I was on Instagram. And yes, LinkedIn's great, but I had way too many messages going to LinkedIn. So sometimes just find them where they're going to be and where it's not completely clogged up. I'm going to talk a little bit about LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn's a great vehicle for connecting. I know it's can turn into kind of a social network at times, and that's not really what I'm on there for, but I think there's so many people in the business world on LinkedIn, and it's a great way to get in touch with someone. So figure that out, right? It's important to say where are my people? And then once we find our people, how are we going to get someone to respond to us? Especially if they haven't met us before. All right, so here are my 8 rules, and it's 4 rules to reaching out and 4 rules to networking, navigating a meeting or a call. All right, number 1, leverage your alumni network or find common ground. Lucky for you all, anyone on the recording or you all on this call, you have a great alumni network, DSP, right? Right there, low-hanging fruit. Hundreds of thousands of people have been through DSP, and a lot of them are in the business world. Leverage that. Leverage your college alumni. And if those two aren't, working for you, find some sort of common ground. Can you tell if you like the same sports team? Are you from the same hometown? Do you have any common interests? People want to help people who they feel connected to. It's human nature. It's your best shot to getting a response. Number 2, don't ask for anything but a little bit of their time. This is where most people make a mistake. They're like, you know what, Melanie, I've been networking. It doesn't work. No one responds to me. I'm like, show me a message. They're like, hey, so-and-so, can you do all these things for me? Why the hell would anyone want to do anything for you? They've never met you before, right? Like no one wants to do work for anyone, let alone someone they've never met. We are not in the business of making people do work for us. We're in the business of flattery, being strategic, and asking people for just a little bit of their time to talk about them. And there we go, 3 and 4, right? We're using flattery, but we're genuine. So like, for example, once you've been in the industry for a bit, a lot of people catch on to this whole referral thing. And having worked at Twitter, at Apple, I get a lot of LinkedIn messages. And there'll be something like, hey, Melanie, I see you work at Apple. I came across a job that I'm really interested in. Here's the link. I would love for you to refer me. Here's a copy of my resume. They're like, oh, Melanie will make money if she refers me, right? And here. And it's like, okay. And then once in a while, I'll get an email or a message, and it's like, hey, Melanie, wow, I saw your article in Fast Company. I bought your book. It really resonated with me for XYZ reason. If you have 20 minutes, I would love to jump on a quick Zoom just to ask you a few questions about your career path. Okay, if I have 20 minutes of time, who do you think I'm going to respond to? 1 or 2? Exactly, 2. And that's not because I don't want to refer someone, but referring someone takes work. And referring is also, it puts yourself on the line, right? If I've never met you before, I'm not going to refer you. I don't know you. I don't know if you're good at your job. If I refer you and you get hired and you suck at your job, they're going to look to me for that. And so before you're asking someone for things, a referral, whatever it may be, we need to just develop that relationship a little bit, have a conversation. Because remember, there's a lot of, there's an internal referral bonus in a lot of companies. So if you have a great conversation, they might even just ask you to refer you, right? They want to make that money, and they build that trust. So here's an example of a message. I wrote this from a DSP perspective. So, hi, Jess. I saw you were in DSP. I just went to my first lead conference and had such a great time networking. I'm sure you recall the feeling. Your experience at Google is so impressive. If you have a few minutes, I would love to hear more about what you do. Best, Melanie. This is a pretty general template, and you can even get beyond this and customize it. I wanted to give you an idea of just kind of the types of templates that we work off of. And you're going to send a lot of these messages. I'm talking 50 messages at one company. Like, we're not just sending it to 2 people and hoping that one of them responds, right? Finally, you're going to get a response. If you keep at it, if you spend weeks, everyone you can message at Google and you keep going, someone will finally say yes. And when someone says yes, all you need is one person. This is the biggest thing to remember. If it's not on the calendar, it's not a call. So if someone agrees to chat, again, in the business of not making people do work, put it on their calendar. Show them that you respect their time. Put it on the calendar, give them your availability, let them choose, put the Zoom link, take care of everything. The worst thing, and this is more of kind of a, something I really drill into college students because we don't always know this in college. I didn't know this until I got my first job, that professionals work off of their calendar. So if someone agrees to chat and you don't put it on the calendar, that call is not happening. All right, so someone agrees to talk, you're like, great. I've never met this person before. Like, what am I going to do in this conversation to get me to where I need to be? Number one, do your research to be prepared. If you want to work at Spotify or Google or whatever company it is, read up on the latest blog posts, understand what the company does. And I say this because not all companies are super black and white. Like, I've worked at some companies where I'm like, I've worked here a year and I still barely understand what we do. Like, things get complicated, right? So really make sure you understand what the company does. Understand the person's path. So like, whoever's talking to you, go on their LinkedIn, look where they've worked, see if they've, posted anything. Do as much research as you can. This is as important as an interview. And then prepare quality questions. And this is all also interview prep. So as you're getting closer, if you want to work at a certain company, this is all going to be reused when you get an official interview. But you're preparing questions, right? You're asking quality questions about them. Maybe it's something about a blog post you read and you had a question about something. Maybe, really think through questions and ask questions that you really want to know. So we talked about in the beginning, right? It's sometimes we have to go back to the basics and think, what gives me energy? I've been working for 12 years. What do I actually enjoy? What are the fundamental things that get me excited? And then you write that down. And this is your chance to have an honest conversation. Maybe you're really interested. What's it like to work there? Tell me what your day-to-day looks like. What's the management style? Because you want to go back to your own list and say, would this job make me happy? Would I be excited to work here? It's not necessarily about the company or the name, but it's like, what are people doing there? Are they enjoying themselves? Is it connected to what gives you energy? And then just shut up and listen. I've had people say, Melanie, oh my God, I totally blew it. I asked one question and they talked for 30 minutes. No, you aced it. That's amazing. It's like paying for, they've got free therapy, right? They're talking, they're letting off all these endorphins. They're just going to be so happy. They're going to be like, oh my God, how can I help you? Thank you for letting me talk for 30 minutes. And don't be nervous. So I say this because, especially from a college and high school perspective, you can get in touch with people at the top. We're not saying reach out to Joe Schmo, bottom of the barrel, entry level. We're saying go to the top because no one does. No one messages the CEO. No one messages people at the top. Everyone thinks they don't respond. It's a funny story that's really relevant, actually. I'm planning a wedding that's happening in 2 weeks. And the company I was at the hotel, the events company, wouldn't respond to my emails. And I'm like, this is so ridiculous. I work in customer service myself and sales. Like, I'm so quick. Like, it's been weeks to get a response. So I found the CEO of their events company. It's a 30,000 person company. And I went on LinkedIn and I said, hey, as a CEO, you should know this. I'm planning a wedding here. I haven't gotten a response in 3 weeks. You guys, in 15 minutes, I had all these calls coming in. I had all these emails because guess what? They look at this. They care about this. People look at your messages at the top. And that was a great example of that happening because you think they're too busy, but no one actually emails them. Okay, so getting back to it, right? So those are the 8 real steps, but I also want to mention, read your message before you send it. It's easy to get in a routine. You're like, boom, boom, boom. You're shooting out these messages. Take your time. It's easy to like mess up names, not spell things correctly. Just take your time and make sure you get it right. Of course, send the invite. Number 3 is thank them for their time. So that's if someone gets on a call with you, you have a great conversation, within 2 hours, send them a thank you note. And a thank you note to show them that you paid attention, you valued their time. So you might mention something, maybe you send a link of like, hey, this conversation made me think of this, really show them that this was valuable. And then there's following up. This is more your investment. Yeah, you might be trying to get a job right now, but maybe you talk to a CMO of a major company. And maybe that's not the company that you're going to be working at, but you have this VIP, this great person who you want to keep in your network. So every 6 months, every year, follow up with that person. Build your relationships. Your network is your net worth. So if over time you start developing these people in your life and you have, 10 different people that you've cultivated relationships for, you're never applying for another job online. That you're always going to be using your network to navigate your career and grow your career and also great mentorship. All right. So when you follow these rules and you have a great conversation and you ask questions, I promise you 90% of the time, they're going to say, awesome. What can I do for you? Thank you for chatting. Those are great questions. How can I help? It's almost weird not to say that after a conversation, especially if you don't come at it and you're not asking for things, they're going to want to help you. And that's when you have your ask ready. This is done before the conversation. So we need to prepare, and it's not black and white, right? Maybe you want an internship. Maybe you want a job. Maybe you just wanted to understand what's going on behind the scenes at this company to make sure it's a company you want to work for. Maybe you want a mentor. Maybe you're talking to Jimmy in finance and you want to talk to Mary in marketing. So you want an introduction. It's not always, I need a job, not always I need a referral. When you're getting a referral, you want to get a referral, if possible, from someone on the team that you want to work at, especially at big companies. So if you're talking to someone on the finance team, which is perfectly fine, but you want to work in marketing, your ask is an introduction. If Jimmy says, how can I help? Feel like, wow, thank you. If I craft a little email introduction, would you be open to introducing me to someone on the marketing team? Because we don't make people do work. Everything we do is all the work for them if we want something. So if you want an introduction, write the introduction in third person. If you want a mentor, ask to keep in touch. Can we keep in touch? Can we jump on a call in a year from now? Can I email you? If you want a job or a referral, ask them everything that's needed in that. A lot of times, most of the time, if they're referring you, they need to write a paragraph about you. Write the paragraph for them. Make sure your resume is tidied up. Make sure you have a cover letter. Make sure you have everything they need. Because not only is it annoying to do work for someone you're trying to help, but it just doesn't get done. If you don't send me a paragraph in third person, if you don't send me your resume, that's going to be put off for a month. Do it all for them. And this goes for anything. I talk about and I teach courses on getting a raise, getting a promotion. Same mentality. Do everything for someone. What does your manager need to get you a raise? Do it for them. What do they need to do for a promotion? What goes into that? How can you put it in a beautiful wrapped up present with a bow on it so they don't have to do a single thing? All right. So we find our people, we communicate strategically, and we know what we want to get out of that conversation every single time. Okay, we're at the tail end here, and then we'll get into a couple questions if we have anything, but I'm just going to tell you a quick story. So I played a sport in college and I was a business major and I didn't know the things I didn't know. So the only company I wanted to work at was ESPN. Because it's easy to get caught on the name, right? We're like, oh, this is a dream job. So anyways, it was my dream job and I applied 100 times a day. I'm not even kidding you. I would set up shop in my living room. My mom called it my office after 4.5 months because I was never leaving. And I had my resume and I would just look online at ESPN and I'd submit. And I would tailor my resume and I would write cover letters. And it was my full-time job for 4 months to apply for these jobs at ESPN. And every single time I applied, I got an automated rejection about 15 minutes later. And I was like, what is this? How does anyone get their foot in the door at these companies? What would even give me a fighting chance? So after 4 months, I said, you know what? I have to switch it up. So I went on LinkedIn, and this was 12 years ago. It was, not everyone was on LinkedIn at the time. I went on LinkedIn and I got in touch. I was messaging with a marketing manager at ESPN. And I had messaged a bunch of people. And finally, this guy said, listen, call me in 15 minutes. We'll talk. I'll let you know what's going on. So I get on the call and he's like, Melanie, your resume has never been seen. We get thousands of applications for a role. And the only way to ever get an interview at ESPN is to get a referral. And I was like, what? Like, they didn't teach you this in college. I'm sorry, but they just did it, right? So I thought I had a fighting chance. Turns out no one ever saw my resume. And I was like, so, and the guy's like, yeah, no, I'm not referring you. Like, I do not know you. And he hung up the phone and I sat there and I was like, okay, so you're saying there's a shot, right? Okay. But really, I thought, okay, I'm going to at least give this one shot. I'm going to try to get someone to refer me, and I'm going to get someone at the very top of ESPN. So I found this guy. I did all this research. Do any of you know who this is? He's not really on air as much anymore. So his name is Neil Everett. He was, at the time, 12 years ago, he was one of the top sportscasters at SportsCenter. And I was doing research on a bunch of sportscasters because I was like, I'm going to find a sportscaster to refer me. And I found out that this guy lived in Hawaii for 10 years. And I'm from Hawaii. And I knew this because he always said "how's it" when he went on SportsCenter, and that's kind of a Hawaii like phrase. And he always repped Hawaii and some athletes. And so anyways, I decided I'm going to write him an email. So I said, aloha from Hawaii. I used commonality, and this was in 2012, so I wouldn't even read it because my writing was not the best, but I used flattery. And then I realized he's completely private. Like, he doesn't even have an email available. He's not on social media. This guy is literally nowhere on the internet. So I just went to work and I'm like, you know what? Neil Everett. I put every possible combination you could think of on this email. I mean, I just threw I think I probably had like 36 combinations at least. And I threw it out there and I was like, you know what? Like, let's go. A week later, I had a missed call and voicemail on my phone. Like, I'm unemployed. I had one job, pick up my phone, right? So anyways, that went to voicemail and it says, hello, Melanie, this is Neil Everett's voice calling you. He literally said that. This is Neil Everett's voice calling you. How do I know you? You had my email. I think I got an email from you. Anyways, call me back. So I'm like, oh my God, this worked. Okay, so I call him back. We have this great conversation. I asked him a bunch of questions and we talked for 45 minutes. And he said, Melanie, what can I do for you? And I was like, literally desperate. And I don't advise this, but I was like, Neil, oh my God, I need an interview at ESPN. Can you get me an interview at ESPN? And he's like, yeah, of course I can get you an interview at ESPN. He's like, you'll have an interview tomorrow. And I'm like, what? I will? And he's like, yeah. And we hung up the phone. 15 minutes later, I get an email from Mary in HR. And she says, hey, Melanie, we came across your resume for the marketing coordinator role. We think you'd be a great fit. Do you have some time to chat tomorrow? And in all sincerity, that changed everything for me because it was so obvious, right? Here I was, the same person, nothing had changed. The only thing that was different was I had someone refer me to the job. Someone that meant something to the company. And all of a sudden I have an interview. And I thought, they need to teach this in college. Why don't I know this? Why wasn't this a course? I would have paid for a course on this. But I tell this story also because it didn't end there. Neil's actually a chapter in my book because he had an insane story of how he landed his job. If any of you want my book, just email me. I'll put my email up and I'll send you a PDF of it. He has an insane story of how he landed his job. And while I was writing my book, I discovered this story. I ended up doing an interview on the stage at SportsCenter with Neil for my book. And then I kept in touch. So again, when you find someone meaningful in your life who you want to be surrounded with, who's a mentor, who's doing cool things, don't lose that connection. Keep in touch. The picture on the right was 7 years later. I happened to be in LA for work for Apple. And I was like, hey, Neil, can I come by and see SportsCenter and bring some friends? And he's like, of course. Now Neil calls me. He's like, Melanie, how can I get involved with going places? How can I bring it to Oregon? How can I do all these things? Because it does come back around. People, forming these relationships over time, they need you sometimes. And I think it's important, right? Because our network is our net worth. Who we cultivate around us, that is what carries you through your career. And it's important to keep track of those people and actually put time and investment into those relationships. I truly believe that you can create the path to your dream job by networking the right way. I really do. I've done it myself. I've done it with so many people. I've worked with so many professionals and college students, across the board. But it's important to remember, when you're thinking about your dream, don't get too far out. Don't get caught up in your ESPNs, right? Because ESPN, these name companies, great, but that doesn't mean that's your dream. Focus on your dream now. Focus on the things you enjoy doing and how do you do more of those things in your life? And how do you do less of the things that drain you? Don't worry about the name of the company, the job title all the time. Like, focus on what you're doing. The money, the companies, all those things will come. And if you're focused on doing the things that give you energy, that align with your skill set, that get you up in the morning, over time, you're going to look back and you're going to go, whoa, am I in my dream job right now? Like, I never even thought this could be my dream job. But don't get too caught up, because that'll only slow you down. This is my really cheesy slide. You have permission to reach out, put on that cape, be fearless out there, because who cares if you're rejected? Only we care. We are so hard on ourselves. No one else cares. So go out there and just do things. Who cares if you get a no? All right, so that rounds it out. I appreciate you all staying with me. So I'm just going to throw this up here. If you guys have any questions, that's my social media. That's my website. All my information's on there. If you want my email, you can also throw it in the chat. Let me stop sharing. All right, I'm going to take a sip of water, but we have a few minutes if we want to talk for about 5 or so minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions that either of you have, including Luke, if you have anything. Yeah, and maybe a question could be helpful to someone watching the recording as well.
I guess one thing I would ask is, so I have an interview tomorrow, which I'm super psyched about, and it's with the GIS manager who sits in Portland, but the people that I know, kind of randomly, but like they work in the same industry as I do, and like we had coffee way back in 2019 before anybody, before we all stopped going out all the time. But they sit in Madison, Wisconsin, where we are. And so I'm kind of like, I get it's a weird timing thing where I would be eventually sitting in Madison. The interview of the person that I got to impress is with a person tomorrow in Portland, Oregon. Like, how do you kind of navigate that? You say, find the right people, but with everything being so kind of all over the place now, like I suspect even if I got the job, I'd be doing data analysis for sites all over the country and project managers all over the country. So how do you target that besides just looking up the company that you're looking for a job description, and just kind of climbing on that?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple things. I want to make sure I completely understand your question. I think one of the things that I'll mention is, and I'm just going to mute you while I'm talking, just so the background noise, and then we can unmute. So when it comes to, so we didn't really talk about kind of the start of landing a job, which is thinking about the types of companies you'd want to work at, and then really it's building that company list, and then it's from there it's about networking. I think and just to make sure I understand, but like when I'm working with people on building their company list, thinking about where they want to work, and then networking from there, I actually don't have them look at open jobs, or I don't have them focus as much on, it's less about what's out there, who's hiring, and it's more just the companies that they feel connected to, and for specific reasons, like companies that are interesting to them for culture reasons, the type of service, or maybe it's leadership at those companies, or it's a product they like. So I actually have them build their company list pretty blind to what's out there because, as you know, like with hiring, jobs posted online don't even mean they're hiring at that point. And then once they have their company list, we work on kind of prioritizing where you're going to start because I only like to focus on a couple companies at a time when it comes to networking. But once you're going after those companies, I don't like, I have people reaching out global, like nationally to different people in different places. So can you specify like what exactly you mean in your question in terms of like the networking piece or talking like, what do you mean with the different states?
It's mostly the observation that where I would start probably would be the folks that I had coffee with in 2019, where we talked about computational fluid dynamics, which I don't do anymore, no interest in, but we had coffee. I was like, gee whiz, you like computers? As do I. Great discussion, folks. And yet the interview with this other person is sitting in Portland, Oregon. And so I'm kind of like, if I had,
I got your cup.
it's more the observation that like, how do I make that connection from the folks in Madison to that person in Oregon? Because like within the organizational structure, I'm not sure it would have gotten to them otherwise. Like I lucked out into making it
okay.
somehow through one round, but I'm like, how do I reliably make that network?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple things. It's like one, it might not be like A to Z, like your the people you had coffee with in Madison might not have a direct connection, especially at big companies with maybe the person that you're interviewing with. But I think, let's say you were setting out and you had a great coffee with someone in Madison, and your ask is like you want to get closer to the team or the job you want to work on, that might be someone in Oregon. Maybe you just figure out like who do they know that's a little closer. Maybe it's someone sitting in Oregon but not on that team, and so you're like, hey, do you mind making that intro? And then you write the intro, you get on a call with them, and then that person that sits in Oregon might now have a connection to the team that you want to work on in Oregon, and so now you've built that, and that's your ask for that person. So like, especially at big companies like at Apple, like I don't really know anyone outside of my department, but like maybe there's a way to kind of bridge that gap and connect. I think there's always a way to kind of get to the next people. Everyone knows someone, and you could get as close as you can. And then maybe it's like you sent a cold email out to someone in Oregon and you reference someone's name at the company, like had a great conversation with so and so, would love to chat. And when someone references a name and they look them up and they see they work at that company, they're like, oh, okay, this person's like in. Kind of get creative with it. But yeah, at big companies, it's always hard to get like that perfect connection. But there's ways to kind of do it.
I would just say too, I've been in a similar situation, David, where I had an interview with a company where I had known someone who was based out of New York, and this interview was for Louisville. And I basically went into the interview and just sort of started off, when they asked the question, tell me about yourself. And it's like, well, XYZ. And also I know this person who works at this company. We had a great conversation. They told me a lot about what you all do. It got me really excited. And that's actually why I'm here and why I applied. And just like that quick, even if they don't know those other people, they could always go look them up to sort of verify that I'm not just making up, some random person. But it went really well, actually. And they ended up knowing those people. And I feel like that connection that you can make, even if brief, is important and useful, I think. But I see what you're saying, because I've been there.
Well, and I think that's a really good point, because we've been talking so much about networking and then getting that into the interview process, but that's such an important thing to kind of that every interview is always going to ask you, so how did you find my company? And typically the answer is, your Google, you employ, I've heard of you. But the better answer is, Oh, I talked to my friend in DSP who works at Google, and they say that you guys have really good fountain drinks in your cafeteria or whatever. But to tie that networking piece into the interview itself is important.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for that question. Austin, did you have anything?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick since we don't have that long. I think one of the things that I'm struggling with, I kind of started making a list of companies that I want to work for, and they inevitably end up just being like my hobby companies, right? Like I love to ski and I love to fly fish, and I'm from Colorado, so that shouldn't very stereotypical. Love Patagonia. But I don't actually really care if I work for those companies or not. What I really want is like a good culture. So how do you go about really digging into and finding companies that aren't those big names necessarily, but that have cultures that fit with your values?
Yeah, so a couple things, and I love that you're saying that because I think that's exactly the way you should be going. It's like most people like, oh, Patagonia, but at the end of the day, let's say you're a data analyst at Patagonia, like you're still doing data analyst things, right? Cool that you work for the company, but it doesn't mean you're on the ski slopes all day. And so it is really about your culture, the management, everything around you. So there's a couple ways. One is I always say, like, don't be afraid to go on Google and say, like, best places to work, small companies in Denver, best places to work, medium-sized companies, top companies, and although that doesn't hit all of them, and although sometimes you have to get paid to get on those, I've found some pretty cool companies that I've never even heard of through these sorts of articles and, just different awards that they give out, especially small and medium. Like I think there's 400,000, like, average, some crazy amount. I was looking in one industry and it might have been advertising, and there was like some wild amount of companies. Okay, I probably know 20 off the top of my head, right? So we just don't know what we don't know. And a lot of these smaller companies have incredible cultures, and you could have a great life there, and we just don't know they exist. So I think the first is actually going in and doing a little bit of research and reading about why they're on that list. A lot of times they talk about their culture or specific things that got them there. That's how I found the first company that I worked at in New York. I typed in best medium-sized companies to work at in New York City, and Undertone was on there. And I was like, whoa, that's so cool. It was like a picture of a beer cart going around on a Friday. And I was like, I want that. And it was exactly what I did want as a recent college grad. The other thing is, I think you can get a lot of information just by networking in a really genuine, not asking for anything way. So like, for example, if you're a part of DSP and it's like, maybe you just go and look in your area, type in like data analyst and look through DSP alumni. Or sorry, I just said data, and this is an example, but you might find a wide array of companies, and you might just message them and say, hey, listen, I'm looking for a job. I saw you're a data analyst here. I would love to just get on a call for 10 minutes and just learn a little bit more about your work to see if, I'm trying to find companies that I would actually be interested in. I just want to hear more about your experience. Sometimes that's like the best way to network too, because then you're not really coming at it like you need something from them. You're just really interested, and naturally they're going to go, oh, you're that too, we have an open role, no way, like, can I refer you? So I like talking to people, because when you're not in a formal interview, like when it's not a formal interview, they're going to tell you exactly how they feel, and they're going to tell you all the things about the company, right? And sometimes it's like horrible, and you're like, thank God I didn't apply for that. Other times you're like, whoa, that's really cool, that fits exactly what I'm looking for. So anyone want to add, Luke, do you want to add to anything on that?
Yeah, I can definitely chime in there. I think just one thing to say is, and to sort of riff off of what Melanie was just saying, is that having those conversations outside of the interview process are so critical. And Melanie and I had met, gosh, maybe a month ago, maybe a little bit more. And she was telling me about her course. We were talking about something a little bit different, but talking about this networking idea. And this is something that I think people do, but maybe don't recognize they do. I certainly wasn't taught it, but it's how I've gotten every job that I've ever had to is through LinkedIn messages. Seriously, just straight up LinkedIn messages. but it usually starts with that conversation that's outside the interview. Hey, could I have 20 minutes on a phone call? It doesn't have to be a Zoom, because back then we weren't doing Zoom as much, but in 2017, 18, 19, but hopping on a phone call and having a conversation and asking about the company outside of that arena that is sort of the interview, like the very formal interview process, has really illuminated for me a lot of the upsides and downsides of some of the companies I was looking at, right? And even now, knowing that in the back of my mind, the other thing that I would add to, and I don't think we touched on this as much, is that constantly, like even when you're in a position, just networking consistently, you're not looking for a job maybe, but you're interested in a particular field. So for example, something that I've been doing really recently is digging into artificial intelligence and learning. So as director of education at DSP, we're thinking about ways we can improve our programming and the things that we do. And so I'm on LinkedIn, and there's all of these folks who are doing really cool stuff with AI. And literally just 3 days ago, I messaged a director and then a CEO who work in AI and education. And both of them, not me, they actually suggested setting up a meeting. And those are just connections. Again, your network is your net worth, to Melanie's point. Those are connections that can grow, not only your own career, but I mean, the career, the job that you're currently in, you're adding value to your current company by reaching out to others and building your knowledge set. There's just so much that comes from networking, I find, that's even beyond the job search. And then say that, the unthinkable happens and you lose your job. It's like, well, I've been talking to 24 people in this field that I'm really interested in, and they have inroads to another 24 people, and so on and so forth. And that's something that I found that's been really helpful for me, is even when I'm not on the job hunt, even when I'm super happy where I'm at, I'm always keeping my eyes open for things I'm interested in, because you never know what could come of that to bolster your current position or help in the future with an inroad. So.
That's such a good point. All right, well, we are at time. Thank you guys for being here. And I know it was a smaller group, but I do love a small, intimate group too. So hopefully this helps in some way. You learned something and you can take it on your job search. You know where to find me. It's my email is also melanie@youaregoingplaces. So I'll put it in the chat in case you all have questions. And thank you, Luke, for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Melanie, and David and Austin. Thank you both for attending. And hopefully you all got something out of this session. Again, it was more intimate, which is great. And just really appreciate both of you. And obviously, Melanie, thank you so much for speaking tonight.
Yeah, I did. I'm pumped up. Let's go. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly,
Awesome.
right?
Yeah,
Thanks, guys.
I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
of course. Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Right.
Papa.